Hi, so I saw a video yesterday from Unnatural Vegan talking about neoliberalism and why being anti-capitalist is anti-vegan. And I just had to do something about it, so this is it. Now, she said I could consider myself a neoliberal, so she's already calling herself a neoliberal. And it's since neoliberalism is an ideology, neoliberal is not something that people normally call themselves the way she's talking about it. And I think she said that people are confusing neoliberalism with libertarianism and saying that neoliberalism is inconsistent with veganism. Well, that is why, because it is inconsistent with veganism. And then she starts talking about extreme anti capitalist sentiment and how that relates to veganism. So we've already gone from talking about neoliberalism, which we haven't, to extreme anti capitalist sentiment. And when we talk about anything extreme, how good is that going to be? Well, when we talk about vegans or veganism as extreme, it's used as a dog whistle for like there's something really wrong with this. So she's already kind of trotting into the whole anti capitalist segment. She says neoliberal is your typical left leaning social progressive. No, that's exactly the opposite of what neoliberalism is. She says it's also being generally pro free market. Well, it's not being generally pro free market, it's being totally pro free market and saying that market forces solve everything and that everything should be defined and used by market forces because that's great. It's like God. That's why neoliberalism is basically an ideology. It's an ideology that promotes basically turbocharged capitalism as the only way that we human beings can organize ourselves viably on the planet. And part of what it does is it makes people think, which is what Unnatural Vegan is referring to in her entire piece. It makes people believe that it's the only option that we possibly can have. And I just want to make it clear from the start that I totally believe that Unnatural Vegan is like so, sincere and genuine in what she's saying, but she could probably have done with a little bit more research to understand the actual comments that she's making now. So she says that neoliberal is pro welfare state and supporting public healthcare. No, that's exactly what neoliberal isn't, because since neoliberalism has been generated, has been created to put more wealth in the hands of the few, basically the corporates and the elites, it sucks money out. It sucks resources out from things like healthcare and the welfare state. That's what has happened in the UK with austerity. That's what happened in global south countries with the so-called structural adjustment programs generated by the IMF, where basically all the sort of like social services, healthcare, anything like that is taken away so that the money can go to the corporate elites via the governments, because the governments will get into debt, then the corporate elites will say, do this to your people, siphon the money out of their resources, and we'll give you more money. That's how it all works. That is the neoliberal agenda. And she said that conservatives often accuse neoliberals of being socialist. No, a lot of conservatives, and I think it's interesting the points that she makes, because a lot of people do think this, that conservatives are basically on the neoliberal path. They're on the sort of like the whole free market ideology of like less regulation, as little regulation as possible is absolutely great. So no conservative would actually accuse neoliberals of being socialist at all. And then she says the wealth in the society, and again, a lot of people believe this, the wealth in the society is generated by capitalist mechanisms. this is a really interesting one because lots of people do believe this. And I know from comments that I've had in my videos that people sincerely and totally believe this about wealth. Whose wealth and where does it go? In the last few decades that we've had, tons more wealth has been concentrated into the hands of a few people. Billionaires, elites, the Bezoses, the Elon Musks, the global corporations, and the people at the bottom end, most economically vulnerable, are struggling, absolutely sent to the wall because of austerity. In whatever country you're in, this is a global phenomenon. Neoliberalism is a global phenomenon. It was dreamt up about 40 years ago to basically de-democratize countries and to put wealth, power, and resources and everything into the hands of a few elites. But the way that the neoliberal ideology comes out is that people believe the opposite. We believe now, most people believe that neoliberalism has given them a sense of freedom and that any other option would be absolutely horrendous. And this again is what Unnatural Vegan is very clearly articulating in her video. She also says something weird, which is like socialism is generally defined as being a transitional state to communism, with communism being the goal. I've never heard that. Maybe she's right. But again, now we've got communism going in there. And she's setting up a sort of like a false dichotomy, which again is what people do when you sort of like start to talk about neoliberalism. Suddenly it's like you're not just not neoliberal, not into neoliberalism, you're critiquing that, you're then anti-capitalist, and then suddenly we've like hopped onto the sort of like, you have to be a communist. And that's how stratified our thinking has become. And then she talks about communism, suffering and death. Communism has been tried innumerable times and it's caused suffering and death. Well, that's, people would argue who know much more about this than I do, like Professor Richard Wolff, who has his own YouTube channel, and he's a Harvard professor of economics. They would argue that proper communism has never actually been tried, and that what has been tried is something that is called communism, but it's not actually, it's more like, tends to be more of a sort of military dictatorship sort of thing. Anyway, that's Professor Richard Wolff. I'll link him in the description. And then she says some vegans say that you can't be vegan unless you're socialist or communist, but nothing in the term which is anti-capitalist. She means there's nothing in the term of being vegan, which is anti-capitalist. Well, it might not be in the actual specific term, but it could actually be in the inferences about justice, global justice, and justice for all beings, which might be seen as anti-capitalist. She says, arguably, we still struggle with monopolies, but it doesn't mean that communism is the answer. She was then talking about animal agriculture and saying, yeah, well, maybe as a concession, you know, arguably we're still struggling with these monopolies. But that doesn't mean that it's not about communism being the answer. It may or may not be the answer. I don't know. I'm talking about critiquing neoliberalism, the notion that market forces will solve everything, and the concentration of power away from any kind of like democratic and local settings, people, into the hands of the elites, the global elites, and that we as ordinary people feel like we have very little power, quite rightly so, because it's all been taken away from us and consistently taken away more. Now, again, she's really big on this, like there is no evidence that anything other than neoliberalism can work. She says the reason we can say animal agriculture is wrong is that we know humanity can survive on a plant-based diet. Well, no, the reason that we can say that animal agriculture is wrong is that it's ethically and morally wrong. And it's also trashing the planet. It's an ethical position. It doesn't have anything to do with that we know we can survive on a plant-based diet. And many people have ethical beliefs and stand up for their ethical beliefs at great personal cost, and maybe even die because of them. And it's not a utilitarian position. she again starts talking about the catastrophic consequences of communism. And again, I don't really know what she's talking. I know what she's talking about is like particularly a particular sort of worldview of many people, that communism didn't work. But again, I would go back to Professor Richard Wolff and others, maybe Chris Hedges, and say, well, it's not about that. Communism never actually happened. And I'm not here to advocate for communism. I'm talking about anti-neoliberalism. So the other thing here is when people talk about the catastrophic consequences of communism, what about the catastrophic consequences of global capitalism, neoliberalism, the neoliberal agenda? Well, we've got countless wars, often instigated by the US or the UK. We've got total ecocidal breakdown. We've got catastrophic climate change, all of that. We've got the rich poor gap widening successively. You know, we've got massive biodiversity loss. We've got COVID as well. That sounds pretty catastrophic to me. I mean, we're not living in paradise. Many people think we're living in hell now. So to sort of frame anything that isn't neoliberalism as catastrophic is, I think, just really not looking enough at what's going on in your own country. And also, particularly when you don't look at what's going on in the majority world, because people there are suffering massively, massively from everything, this whole neoliberal agenda. Starvation, flooding, droughts, heat, too much heat, what do you call it? Heat waves, you know, environmental meltdown. I've been there, I've seen it, it's horrendous. You know. So we're not really living in a sort of neoliberal paradise, anything but. And then she talks about morality as a product of choice, but morality is a product of ethics. You know, we're trying to be ethical as vegans. And when it comes to economics, we need to have a viable choice. But in communism, that is just not true. Again, we've got this sort of like false dichotomy of it's either neoliberalism or it's communism. It's not like that. That's the only point I'm making. But actually, then she says, which is interesting, it doesn't mean to say that we can't research economic theory and try and find something better. So that's really an interesting comment, because she's admitting there, I don't know if she's aware of it, that what she's talking about is a theory, economic theory. It's a theory. It doesn't mean to say it's a fact. Like some people will have a theory that the earth is flat. Does that make it a fact? Most people would say not. Because you've got a theory, it's hypothetical. It's not actual. You look to data, whether that's gathered or whether you do scientific research to stand that up. Economic theory is just that. And then she says, but what this means is that it's wrong to advocate for the abolishing capitalism based on some hypothetical work and a leap of faith. So, well, no, lots of work has been done on neoliberalism. It's not hypothetical. You know, you look at data for poverty in any country practically, from majority world to so-called developed world, the rich-poor gap is massively increasing. You know, the data is there. So it's not a hypothetical work, and it's not a leap of faith. You know, catastrophic climate breakdown is not a leap of faith. You know, the data's been gathered for sort of decades. Biodiversity loss, not a leap of faith. All these are integral to the neoliberal agenda. Work, buy, consume, die. All the money goes into the hands of the elites. And then suckering us into believing that that's the only way that we can possibly live. And then she says, and you know, she's not the vegan police. I don't like to say that you're not vegan if, and then you know what's going to happen. But I do think that anti-capitalist sentiment is anti-vegan. Well, I think exactly the opposite, Unnatural Vegan, and I'd love to debate you on this a bit more, um, because you haven't really proved your case at all. It seems to be that partly what she's saying, that if we also mean that we're talking about human animals in the definition of veganism, which we are, then cruelty to humans is not vegan. And then she comes out with something that I totally agree with, trying to push an entire society into, at best, an unknown situation by putting countless of livelihoods and lives at risk in that society based on personal ideological reasons. That's cruel. Unnatural Vegan. I agree with every single word of that. And what you're describing is the neoliberal agenda. That is exactly what neoliberalism is all about. Pushing. People got around, sat in rooms, sat around tables, and discussed neoliberalism. I don't know what name they gave it. Some of them might have called it neocons, but basically it's neoliberalism, and decided that this was the way they were going to run the world. Because things like unions, maybe communists as well, back in the day, I think it was post just after the war, perhaps just before the Second World War, was starting to have too much influence. And the businesses and the elites were getting scared, and then they instigated the neoliberal project. Noam Chomsky is the best person to speak about this. He's got some really short, snappy videos about it, much more short and snappy than this one. So she says, the desire to tear down for no credible reason any and all capitalistic, and she always used the word capitalistic, which I don't understand, it's capitalist systems, without regard for human suffering that has always inevitably resulted, is cruel. Again, thank you. Unnatural Vegan, 100% agree with you there. She's describing austerity. She's describing structural adjustment. She's not describing anti-capitalism. She definitely, I don't think, describing communism, even if that was a thing. Although she then says, I know that the intent is not cruel. Okay. So then another reason that she brings in is that according to the Vegan Society, the vegan definition includes, promotes the use, the development and use of animal-free alternatives. And then she makes another leap here. There's no part of veganism makes any sense outside of a standard economic model of supply and demand. Without capitalism, eating plant-based is purely symbolic. No, I mean, you don't need any sort of supply and demand thing. I mean, it just makes your life a little bit easier if you have vegan cheese. But hey, when I was living in a country that didn't have vegan cheese, it was not an issue, When I was in a country that didn't have vegan burgers, hello, I made my own vegan burgers, black beans and onions, and a recipe, and a little thing we call cooking. Anyway, so she says denial of. Oh no, then she says that the presumption of capitalist context is part of the definition of veganism. Again, I'd beg to differ. I'd say the opposite, that the definition of veganism from the Vegan Society, which is, it's a definition, they're not necessarily in tablets of stone, would imply in the wider sense something that was more egalitarian and pushing justice measures rather than profit measures. But hey ho. Then she says, denial or opting out of capitalism makes vegan ethics irrelevant. It fails to do good in the most cogent way that veganism acts on the world by changing production. So this is the notion that we can consume our way out of our horrendous problems globally by something called ethical consumerism. Again, this is just, it's a lie. It would be lovely if it was. We're facing system collapse now. You know, globally, we're facing system collapse. And this is what a lot of people don't seem to sort of like want to take on board. And I completely understand that. I don't want to take it on board, but we are facing system collapse globally because of catastrophic climate breakdown, because of biodiversity loss, because of all the things that we vegans don't, well, all the things that we think are horrendous, like overfishing, decimation of the oceans, topsoil erosion, animal agriculture, major contributor to that, and this whole sort of like neoliberals separating out the elites up here from the rest of us down here, ever widening gap, and resources just totally being channeled into the hands of the ever richer elites who are basically insane. And I'm thinking Elon Musk. That is not part of veganism. That is not part of veganism. So consumerism, ethical consumerism is not a thing. We need to degrowth, deconsume, and like it or not, collapse is coming. I mean, that's the thing. Nobody wants to hear it. It's coming probably in the next few decades because food will be unable to grow in a lot of places because of catastrophic climate breakdown. We need to be planning and organising ourselves as communities and as vegans, perhaps leading in this or certainly being part of this, to make plans to look after ourselves and the other animals as this catastrophic event. Well, it's just unfolding everywhere. Sorry to be the bearer of bad news on this sort of like, grey Thursday afternoon, but it is. And we need to face facts. If we don't know what the reality of the situation is, how can we cope with it, And the elephant in the room, yes, is animal exploitation, animal use. But the other elephant in the room is neoliberalism as the driver of many of these toxic, or the majority of this toxic way of living, including animal use. So then she says that she doesn't, and fair play to her, she's talked about these sensible issues, so well done, great. I'm arguing with you, loads of people argue with me. Hey, that's YouTube, isn't it? So her final thoughts: I don't have any political ideology. I'm not fervently pro-capitalism. And that's the interesting thing, is because a lot of people would absolutely say that about themselves, that they're not pro-capitalism. But everything that basically comes out of their mouth is like fantastically, extremely pro-capitalist. But because we live in a dominant culture, which is rapidly pro-capitalist, it just seems that we're the normal people. And anybody that has a sort of like a squeak of, oh, no, I think neoliberalism is actually wrong, becomes this extreme anti-capitalist problematic person. So she's just reflecting, the dominant cultural ethos. And she also says, which I find mind-boggling, is I'm not even committed to neoliberal. It's just the closest descriptor in terms of what I currently believe in terms of politics. But I'm definitely anti-capitalist and communist. There's no evidence for it being anything other than a horrible, dangerous political theory when put into practice. As I said, well, let's just look at, I think she's in North America. I don't know if she's American or Canadian. Let's just think about what happened when the Europeans went to that continent. What did they do? We all know, they decimated systematically the local populations. That continues. There's slavery. That basically continues in other forms. And it's the same way anywhere where the colonials went out to basically siphon off resources from other countries, the European colonials. So in terms of horrible, dangerous political theory, I would say that certainly neoliberalism is, and therefore looking at what capitalism has done in the past, that is also a horrible, dangerous political theory. So that was my thought. But there was a little interesting bit at the end of her video where it looks like you're going to get an outtake. And I thought this whole little segment just encapsulated everything that kind of she embodies and that the people that she inadvertently represents will think like. So she started, there's a cut on that video, and then it's like she's chatting away and she's like banging on about a bubble bath. And she mentions the brand name, and it's like it's all bubbly and it's minty and it's this and it's that. It's all very lovely, and now it's out of season. Now I've got two. And I'm just thinking that, crikey, well, is that like a little advertorial? Is she getting paid for it? I don't know, but I just thought it was a bit strange. And then she says, "Oh well, I've got my Patreons, so hey ho, capitalism, Patreons, yeah, money, more coming in, tremendous, and I've got my Amazon store." She says, "Okay, Amazon, with her affiliate links, and it's really difficult to know what to recommend people should buy." She says, well, let's just think about Jeff Bezos, the second richest man in the world. He used to be the richest until Elon Musk took over a few weeks ago. Jeff Bezos, who owns Amazon. And Unnatural Vegans got her Amazon store. Now, we all know about the horrendous conditions that the Amazon workers exist under. It's starting to make sense, isn't it? She says, "I buy everything on Amazon." But she's not an extreme capitalist, and she's not extremely pro neoliberalism. Well, I'll link her video down below so you can check it out yourself and see what you think. She has got 260,000 subs. I think she had 5,000 dislikes and about 1,000 likes. The discussion on her channel was amazing. I mean, in the comments was actually amazing. I mean, she's got a fantastic audience there. So, and I think, respect to her for bringing up this subject and talking about it in an adult way. And thank you, anybody that's been listening to the live stream. Hey, guess what? This is another live stream that was supposed to be a recording. So, it's scary. This is Animal Justice Emergency. Together, we can critique neoliberalism, take action, organise together to end the war on other animals. You have a great day. Stay safe. And thanks for being here. Steph, Laura, appreciate this. I'm going to try and make these regular. So, yeah, I'll post on the channel again. Don't forget to like and subscribe. You take care. See you soon.